So far I've talked about the embodied cognition approach, as the term suggests. In fact, most debates in philosophy and cognitive science about embodiment have focused on trying to embody cognition, understood as distinct from emotion. You know, there are exceptions, but I think that's still a fair generalization. So now I want to tell you, well, if you take an embodied cognition perspective, then what are you going to say about emotion? How are you going to think about emotion? Now, what is emotion? I'm not going to give you a definition. I'm just going to show you a video inspired by Sean's own video. I don't know if there's... Oh, no. Yes. It's going to be audio.
They call me to count because I love to count things. In fact, I am looking for some things to count right now. Oh, dear. I don't see anything to count. Oh, I must look some more. How could this be? There is nothing to count. Oh, and I wanted to count so much. This is very frustrating. Oh, frustrating. That is one feeling. Oh, I counted a feeling. That makes me happy. Oh, and happy is a feeling. That makes two feelings. I love counting feelings. Oh, love, another feeling. That's 3 feelings. Oh, I'm so proud. Proud, that's 4. 4 fabulous feelings. Now, let me see. Oh, no, I can't think of any more feelings to count. Oh, and that makes me sad. Sad? Oh, that's a feeling. 5 feelings. Oh, that's wonderful. I feel more than happy. I feel exultant, ecstatic, exuberant. Oh, that's 6, 7, 8 feelings. Ooh, that was a lot of feelings. Feeling all those feelings makes me feel exhausted. Aha! I better go home and catch 40 wings. No, 41 wings, 42 wings, 43 wings. No, make that 44 wings.
Right. Now, I didn't want to make any specific point with that. Although I know you can make some, can we count emotions? Are those all emotions? Are some moods? What is the relation between feelings and moods? But that could be actually a good, maybe I'm going to show this for my philosophy of emotion class. First thing I'm going to show. So, I mean, at least what I presented in this video is because he has all these words for emotions. Well, I'm going to get to feelings in a second. But so these are, English words for emotions: anger, fear, happiness, sadness, disgust, surprise, guilt, shame, embarrassment, pride, jealousy, envy, and all the other ones that he mentioned too. Well, are they feelings? There is a big debate on whether emotions are feelings in the philosophy of emotions. But I think many people agreed that you cannot just reduce emotion to feelings if by feeling you just mean the subjective experience of being sad, happy, anger, etc. And one of the main points is that, well, you know, some people might say, hey, you're really angry. It's like, no, I'm not angry, I'm not angry. Yes, you are angry. And, well, why do we say that? Because there is also expression, behavior, that seems to be really quite important in emotions. So I like to show this, I like it because there are not many facial expressions here that are taken as facial expressions of basic emotions in psychology, maybe sadness. But no, we still kind of think, okay, this guy is undergoing some kind of emotion, even if sometimes it's hard to label them. So, but anyway, the point is that there is lots of expression going on here, facial expressions, bodily expression that is suggesting us that there is an emotion going on. Further complication here is that, so I'm talking in English now, so I'm using English words. I'm Italian, so sometimes I do think, well, some Italian emotion words don't really map onto the English ones. In fact, the whole concept of emotion we don't really have in Italian, so I wonder how much that influences my research. But then, you know, what about then So I hope there is nothing rude. I don't know what this means, so if you can, I just googled Japanese manga emotions. I thought this could be it, but maybe you can then translate for me. And I don't know whether this translates into English at all. I don't know how you. So there are, in fact, there are social constructionists that claim that. Cultures differ changed in the way they conceptualize different emotions, and also how they conceptualize the relation between emotion and other psychological faculties. So I actually am very keen for the discussion period, because I'd love to hear more about the Japanese conception of emotion, how you talk about emotion, whether you have a distinction between emotion and other affective states or cognition, as I'm going to get to this. Okay, so I'm going to first of all give you what in the Western world, which also is not exactly entirely confident with talking about the Western thought, but I guess, okay, I'm Italian, I live in England. I think still this applies to both our cultures, and I think it's true that it applies to, Europeans and North Americans' way of thinking. And I'm talking about folk thinking. So again, it's not something that I'm particularly confident with. How can we say about what the folk, everyone thinks about? But I have, because it's my topic of interest, I do pay quite a lot of attention about how people talk about these things. And I definitely think it's true that often this opposition between emotion and reason is very much in the Western background. So emotions are typically seen as opposed to reason, where reason is characterized as intellect, knowledge, cognition. That is, cognition, it comes from conoscere, which means to know, rational understanding, rational judgment. And emotions themselves are opposed to reason in part because they're outside our control, they are passive. So in fact, in English, you have a history of emotion theories where emotion at some point were very much called the passions. And passions has the same root as passivity. So passions are the things that overwhelm you, that they happen to you and you can't control them, as opposed to your rational thinking. And often the passivity is associated with the idea that emotions are embodied, that is, they come with a variety of bodily changes. So if you are, you're frozen by fear, maybe you're seeing a spider that rationally it's not dangerous, but your body is completely frozen, so you're in a state of fear. It's a passion where there are bodily changes that you cannot control. So there is very much at the core of Western thought, both philosophical and then also theory in science, of this head-heart distinction. And it plays out in different ways. So I actually went to Google Images and typed head versus heart, and tons of images came up. So you have the two things pulling against each other, battling, and then you have these two who are saying more or less the same thing. The brain, the head, is telling you to think, not to be impulsive. No, last time you got hurt, won't. Or this one says, wait, hang on, let's think about this. Shut up, let's go and do this. And then you have the kind of opposite way, if you would say, stop thinking so much and go where your heart takes you. So now, in affective science, people have tried to challenge this view. So what is affective science? Well, affective science is a kind of cousin of cognitive science. It's a field that has been emerging in the last 10 years, I would say. And it's, again, it's an interdisciplinary approach that tries to studies emotion, where are neuroscientists, psychologists, philosophers. And the dominant view in affective science today emphasizes that emotions include cognitive states. So they are trying to say, well, this is not really correct if you're trying to say, emotions are mainly the heart, they are mainly associated with bodily changes, and cognition is the heart, the head, the brain, the rational thought. And that's because emotions seem sometimes to provide reasons, quite good reasons for behaving in a certain way. They're not entirely irrational, and also they seem to include a variety of thoughts and judgments and evaluations. So many people, psychologists, philosophers today emphasize that emotions include evaluations or appraisals. That's the word that you find very much in the literature, the idea of a cognitive appraisal. So if you take a state of fear, the idea here is that fear might well involve an expression of fear, or you're frozen by fear, but that's not all. It also includes the evaluation, the cognitive evaluation that something is dangerous, or sadness includes the evaluation that something has been lost, and so on and so forth for various emotions. And psychologists have tried to capture the cognitive core of all of these emotions. And so where is the body then in this approach? Again, many different views, but I think that it's fair to say that most views would say that the body is still quite important in emotion. We can see, in fact, maybe even as a necessary component of emotion. But what it does mainly is responding to these evaluations that go on during emotion. And so this idea is very much in the core of the so-called componential approach in psychology, but philosophers have also been influenced by it. The idea here is that emotions are made of different components. It's not clear whether they are all necessary for an emotion. Some people seem to think that, well, as long as you have most of them, we can say it's an emotion. So again, it's not really a clear definition there. But cognition in this approach is definitely one component. So this appraisal idea I was telling you. Then the one component that is talked about is the component of action readiness. So when you're angry at someone, you would like to shout at them, or Italians. But you don't do it, but still you have this urge to do something. So that's seen as an important part of emotion by many. Then there's the actual things that you do when you are in an emotional state. Then there is the expressive part. Facial expressions have been crucial in the study of emotion, are still very central in affective science. But now there is increasing interest in studying scientifically also the vocal aspects of emotion and the whole gestural aspects. And then there is the important component of autonomic arousal. So that when psychologists use this term, they refer to activity of the body that is under the control of the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system is a division of the peripheral central system. So we have the central nervous system and then the peripheral nervous system, which is divided into somatic nervous system, autonomic nervous system, enteric nervous system. So anyway, I have a picture at some point. But so autonomic arousal refers to activity in the body that is not under our control. So, the acceleration of the heart rate, the dilation of the pupil, the erection of the hair, the respiration rate changing, sweating of the hands, etc. And then some people also think, well, we should put feeling as a kind of component of emotion there as well. And I'm just going to give you one example of this so you don't think I'm making this all up. But so Klaus Scherer, who is a very prominent psychologist of emotion, he's the director of the Swiss Center for Affective Science, which is a huge center, interdisciplinary center on emotion. He's been developing over many years the so-called component process model. And he thinks of emotions as systems of different components. The appraisal process, autonomic physiology, action tendencies, motor expression, and subjective feeling. And I think he thinks that these are all necessary for you to have an emotion. If you don't have all of them, you're just a kind of pseudo-emotion or a proto-emotion, something like that. But as this schema shows you, really he's been focusing on then studying the cognitive aspect of emotion. And he's put all his efforts in really trying to distinguish the various evaluations that are going on when you are undergoing an emotional process. So he thinks that the process of, we don't just do rough evaluation, oh, that's dangerous, I'm afraid. There is lots of different processes that are going on. So you're evaluating the relevance of the stimulus for your own survival, the implication of maybe your action possibilities, your capacity to cope with the stimulus, and also perhaps whether in some cases the stimulus corresponds or not with your own values and norms. And then he even thinks that even this can be divided up into very specific evaluation checks. I'm not going to read them all. And so his view is that these cognitive checks or processes, they influence the rest of the emotion system. And then what happens at this level is, kind of interrelation between these systems. Now, notice the arrow stops here. There is this one that goes up here, which equals indirect relation. So what you get is the view in which emotion is very much a complex system, which involves cognition as well as bodily. I'm just going to very simplify and talk about this as the body, the heart. But everything is really driven by the cognitive process, by the head. So the cognitive process of appraisal is what determines the changes in the rest of the emotion system according to this approach. So from an embodied cognition perspective, this view is, well, I would say, is a bit like Cartesian in the sense that it's still separating very much between the head, the reason, the cognition, and the heart. So it splits emotions into two parts, the central cognitive non-embodied part and the bodily one, which is entirely guided by the cognitive one. So in other words, the componential approach, which is quite, it illustrates well the cognitive approach in emotion theory, it assumes a non-embodied and centralized view of cognition. So Captain Harlock is back. So the point I'm trying to make here is that cognitive, this recent componential cognitive approach in affective science is trying to say, no, we shouldn't think of head and heart as opposing each other. We should think of emotions as themselves having a head. But then what happens is that they take emotions and split that into head and heart components. And that's where I think that an embodied approach might have something to say. Say, well, you're still, again, thinking that it's very easy to draw a boundary and, kind of, you will cut the organism into a part that is doing the thinking and a part that is doing the emoting, the responding, the undergoing, the passive part. So I'm just gonna.
Just a quick question.
Yeah.
Maybe a question to you, Liz, maybe Lisa. When we dream a really emotional dream, do we also see some kind of bodily response at the same time? Okay.
Oh yeah, definitely. It's one of those rare cases where we sometimes have a pretty isomorphic relationship. Like the rare cases when we catch intense nightmares in the lab, for example, there's a very clear sort of heart rate response, the respiration is faster, respiration, skin conductance, all those things tend to go together.
Okay.
And also one of the definitions of like nightmare, is something that wakes you up but really has this very strong autonomic response. Yeah.
What about facial expressions? What about facial expressions?
Oh, you mean of the sleeping person?
Yeah.
Well, they're practically paralyzed, right? They're atonic and REM sleep, so it's hard. But some people have put like sensors on, just to see mini twitches. And like we often put this like corrugator muscle to see on the ground. You don't really get that much clear cut, but it could be if we find more nuanced. Yeah.
Well, from the point of view of that, I mean, that does actually suggest in some sense that the arrows only go one way for certain things. Right? If you can paralyze all your muscles so your muscles don't respond, but you still can experience an emotional state that would normally cause your muscles to respond, and you behave in a way that's consistent with that emotional state, the entirety of the emotional state is consistent, it suggests that the actual, motion of the muscles is not essential to that process. Whereas on other things, it might be that, for instance, if you changed your galvanic skin response through some medication, you would actually experience an emotional state as a response to,
Yeah.
it would somehow amp up. So I wonder, to what degree can you say which arrows are one directional, which arrows are two directional?
Yeah, it's very hard to say. It's hard to say if the dream itself creates the body activation or if the body activation due to, circadian rhythm of cortisol. Like in the morning there's more cortisol expressed, and that's when we tend to have nightmares anyway. But then those nightmares are probably driven by internal processes. They tend to coincide with trauma, something.
I definitely have nightmares when it's a little bit hotter, and if it's hot out, I tend to have nightmares when I wake up.
That's it. Yes. Body states seem to affect for sure, but it's hard to measure exactly since we're actually.
And what elements of each?
Yeah.
It's very hard to completely isolate the brain from the body, and that's what this is, because emotions seem to involve the body at so many different levels.
Maybe like logging. example like isolated brain?
Well, locked-in syndrome is not really isolated, but the locked-in syndrome person cannot move, but it has an autonomic nervous system which is functioning. It's very, very hard to decide, okay, I cut this, I cut this, cut this, and then what am I left with? A brain floating in the air? But that's kind of... Yeah, well, I get to this, but it's really a crucial question. Yeah.